Khabib Nurmagomedov absolutely humiliated drug addict, alcoholic, sexual predator Conor McGregor after Conor McGregor accused him of scamming his fans by selling an NFT that a lot of people bought based on exactly what it was advertised as.
Khabib Nurmagomedov just fired back at Conor McGregor's latest accusations with what might be the most savage clapback in the entire history of MMA. In a move that was equal parts cutting and brilliant, he invited his bitter rival to a rehabilitation center he runs in Dagestan. But here's where it gets really interesting. Buried deep within Khabib's scathing response was something that nobody, and I mean nobody, expected to see. A hint that we've all been desperately waiting for. A hint of resurrection and a hint of a final definitive reckoning.
There is no way good guy Khabib used his late father's name as well as Dagestani culture to scam his fans and fire sell a bunch of digital NFTs online and then delete all of the content after they were sold, leaving his fans robbed of their money. There is no way a good guy do this.
The date is November 27th, 2025. And the entire combat sports world has been absolutely consumed by a firestorm of truly unimaginable proportions. We're talking about a massive conflagration that didn't start in the octagon, where these two legendary warriors once clashed in what still stands as the highest-grossing pay-per-view event in UFC history. No, this new war began in the digital arena of social media. A place where words can cut far deeper than any elbow strike and where accusations can leave wounds more permanent than any submission hold could ever hope to inflict.
Let's be honest, the main reason there are so many anti-Muslim MMA fans is because Khabib brutalized McGregor back in 2018. The casual incels were devastated watching McGregor have his soul taken that night and simply never recovered.
Conor McGregor, the now 37-year-old Irish phenomenon who once stood proudly atop the mixed martial arts universe as its undisputed king, had mysteriously vanished from X, formerly Twitter, around early October 2025, right after hyping yet another UFC return. His departure from the platform was shockingly quiet. It came without any fanfare, without a single word of explanation, and without the usual theatrical flourish that had defined virtually every single moment of his wildly controversial career.
My count is 56 former drug addicts at my rehabilitation center in Dagestan that I treated. Come to Dagestan, act Notorious MMA, they'll take care of you here. Mexico didn't help you as far as I can see.
One day, he was there, a whirlwind of digital chaos, hurling insults at enemies both real and imagined, and threatening comebacks that never seemed to actually materialize. And then, just like that, the next day, he was simply gone, vanished like smoke in the wind. You can bet that observers all across the mixed martial arts community began to speculate wildly about the reasons for his sudden and uncharacteristic disappearance.
Conor he's kind of an embarrassment to his family. And I do believe Conor has a disease, but I do also believe that Conor is a complete piece of shit. And Khabib should say this. And Khabib did open some drug rehabilitation centers in Dagestan.
Some people suggested that his accumulating legal troubles had finally caught up with him, in ways that demanded absolute and total silence from him and his team. Others began whispering about serious health concerns, both physical and psychological, speculating that the heavy toll of years of combat and unending controversy had finally extracted a price from his body and mind that could no longer be concealed from the public's view.
If you want to go back to some of the crypto incidents that Khabib was related in, I guess you should talk about what Conor did. Because if we're conflating the two things, selling an NFT exactly as advertised, and we're conflating that with a crypto scam, let's not forget, okay? Because Conor, and we're not going to go through all this, Conor hyped up a crypto coin, and then he rug pulled that crypto coin.
The truth, when it finally clawed its way into the light on November 23rd, 2025, proved to be far stranger than any fiction anyone could have dreamed up. McGregor resurfaced out of nowhere, dramatically claiming a psychedelic rebirth. He described a 36-hour hallucinogenic therapy session down in Mexico, where he says he saw vivid visions of his own death, claimed he met Jesus, and even got saved during this extraordinary experience, all to heal what he vaguely just described as trauma.
Khabib took Conor's soul years ago, and the fans have never recovered, and they hate Muslim fighters because of it. And I will continue to call it out. I don't care.
The specific trauma he was seeking to address remained frustratingly undefined, though anyone following his career could probably construct a pretty comprehensive list of likely candidates. There were the legal woes that had been mounting with disturbing regularity, the string of serious injuries that had plagued his every attempt at a competitive comeback, the devastating 1-3 record he had compiled since his legendary victory over Eddie Alvarez, and of course, the civil assault liability verdict that had permanently stained his reputation, a verdict he definitively lost on appeal back in July.
And luckily, Khabib called it out, he acknowledged it, and he embarrassed Conor McGregor for being the low-life piece of that he is. But it's just sad to me, a lot of fans co-sign this. It's sad to me that you got content creators saying, oh, it's definitely a scam.
Now, he proclaimed to the entire world, with his characteristic, unwavering bravado, he was completely transformed, almost beyond recognition. He was now jacked, he claimed, and was deep in preparation for a glorious, triumphant return to the UFC sometime in late. And to back it up, the training videos started to appear on his social media accounts, showcasing a physique that certainly suggested he'd spent countless hours in the gymnasium. He then started teasing a brand new interview series with the ex-Navy SEAL Rob O'Neill, yes, the very man who killed Osama bin Laden, to be filmed at McGregor's own Black Forge Inn pub in Dublin. And just to add another log to the fire, he also sued Sky News for defamation over a reporter's unflattering comments about his civil verdict. It was classic McGregor, all offense, all the time. But if Conor McGregor had hoped that his so-called spiritual awakening would mark a clean and total break from all his past controversies, he was about to be rudely reminded that some rivalries never ever truly end, and perhaps more importantly, some enemies never ever truly forgive. On November 25, 2025, Khabib Nurmagomedov, the retired undefeated Eagle from Dagestan, who had inflicted upon McGregor what was arguably the most humiliating defeat of his entire career, launched his Papaka NFTs on the Telegram messaging platform. These were unique digital versions of the traditional Dagestani hat that Khabib had worn with such visible pride throughout his legendary fighting days, each one signed and explicitly connected to the legacy his late and beloved father. The elder Nurmagomedov Abdulmanap had tragically passed away in July 2020 from complications related to COVID-19. It was a devastating loss that had directly prompted Khabib's retirement right at the absolute peak of his powers, a decision that had completely stunned the fighting world but also powerfully demonstrated the incredible depth of his commitment to his family above all else. You see, the papaka itself carries a profound cultural significance in Dagestan. It is not merely a hat, it stands as a powerful symbol of honor, of tradition, and of a fierce, masculine pride that has been worn by generations of mountain warriors. For Khabib to digitize this symbol as an NFT represented a fascinating attempt to share his cultural heritage with his fans worldwide, while at the same time building a business venture that could help support his various philanthropic initiatives. The NFTs sold out completely within just hours of their launch, reportedly generating a staggering $4.4 million in revenue. By any reasonable standard, it was an incredibly successful business venture that brilliantly combined cultural heritage with emerging blockchain technology. And here's the key part. The purchasers received exactly what was advertised: unique digital collectibles that were directly tied to one of the most successful and beloved fighters in the entire history of the UFC. Conor McGregor, however, saw something very, very different. He saw an opening. He saw an opportunity to strike at his most hated rival, a chance to question his integrity on a global public stage, and an opportunity to drag his name and his family's legacy right through the mud. On November 26, 2025, McGregor launched his assault with his signature reckless aggression. His initial post, which was later deleted as has become his characteristic pattern, contained accusations that would have seemed completely outrageous coming from anyone else. But from the man who had already spent years attacking Khabib's religion, his family, and his entire cultural identity, they seemed almost predictable. McGregor made the explosive claim that Khabib had used his late father's name to scam his own fans by fire-selling NFTs and then deleting the promotional content immediately afterward. The accusation was as deliberately inflammatory as it was completely and utterly without any factual merit. What McGregor tried to characterize as deleting evidence was, in reality, just a standard post-sale procedure. The original promotional link had simply been removed following the successful sellout of the collection and was then replaced with a thank you message to the community. Telegram CEO Pavel Durov's partner even later confirmed this very explanation publicly, but the damage, if that was indeed McGregor's intent, had already begun to spread like wildfire across the internet. You can bet that the anti-Muslim elements within the MMA fanbase, a contingent that had been vocal ever since Khabib's dominant victory over McGregor at UFC 209, seized upon these false accusations with predictable enthusiasm. Khabib Nurmagomedov is not a man who suffers insults in silence, and he never has been. Now, at 36 years of age, holding a perfect 29-0 professional record, and with absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone in the fighting world, he certainly was not about to start now. Especially not when his family's legacy was being so publicly attacked. His response came swiftly and with a kind of savage precision that was reminiscent of his fighting style. "You absolute liar," he wrote. "You will always try to darken my name after you got destroyed that night, but you will never achieve that." He even repeated the line for emphasis. "You absolute liar, you will always try to darken my name after you got destroyed that night, but you will never achieve that." He then added, "Yes, good guys, don't do that." This is a 100% fact. And that simple phrase, "that night," needed absolutely no further explanation. Every single person in the combat sports world knew exactly which night Khabib was referencing. October, it was UFC 209 at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. The night that generated an astronomical 2.4 million pay-per-view buys, which at that time was the highest total in UFC history. The night that ended with Conor McGregor frantically tapping to a brutal neck crank at 2 minutes and 3 seconds of the 4th round. That night devolved into a chaotic post-fight riot when Khabib famously jumped the cage to attack McGregor's cornerman, Dillon Danis. It was the night that resulted in Khabib being fined $500,000 and suspended for 9 long months. And it was the night that broke something fundamental deep inside Conor McGregor, something that has seemingly never fully healed. Khabib continued his response, defending his NFT project with his characteristic directness. He wrote, "Good guys don't do that. They don't create exclusive digital gifts with real-time value that you can share with your friends and family. Gifts in the shape of papaka hats that symbolize tradition and culture of Dagestan people." McGregor, of course, just doubled down with increasing ferocity, calling Khabib a low IQ troglodyte and demanding a public apology for supposedly robbing fans. He continued to invoke Khabib's deceased father in terms that many observers found to be completely repugnant, a disturbing pattern that had characterized his attacks ever since the heated lead-up to UFC 229, when he had similarly targeted Abdulmanap with crude remarks specifically designed to provoke an emotional response from his son. The irony of it all was not lost on those who remembered what that infamous October night had actually produced. McGregor had talked a lot about fathers then too. He had made crude jokes about Khabib's family and had openly mocked everything that Dashani held sacred. And then what happened? He had been systematically dismantled over 4 brutal rounds before desperately tapping to escape a neck crank that threatened to put him to sleep, or possibly worse. You have to understand, the psychological trauma of that devastating defeat had clearly never healed. And now, a full 7 years later, McGregor was still reaching for the very same weapons that had failed him so spectacularly all those years before. Then came the rehabilitation invitation on this digital battlefield. Khabib Nurmagomedov's very next move demonstrated precisely why he had dominated Conor McGregor so completely in their single meeting inside the octagon. It wasn't just about physical superiority, it was about a level of psychological composure that his Irish rival simply could not match. Instead of continuing to exchange petty accusations about NFTs and business practices on the same low level where McGregor seemed determined to operate, Khabib pivoted with surgical precision. He shifted the conversation to a subject that cut directly to the very heart of McGregor's well-documented personal struggles. "My count is 56 former drug addicts at my rehabilitation center in Dagestan that I treated," Khabib wrote, referencing the incredible philanthropic work he had undertaken since retiring from the sport. He then addressed McGregor directly. "All the notorious MMA, they'll take care of you here. Mexico didn't help you, as far as I can see." The reference was absolutely unmistakable, and it was devastatingly effective. McGregor had just finished publicly documenting his psychedelic therapy journey in Mexico, framing it as some kind of triumphant spiritual awakening. Khabib was now suggesting, with his signature brutal directness, that whatever healing McGregor believed he had achieved was nothing more than a complete illusion. The message was clear: the fundamental problems that were plaguing the Irishman's life remained just as acute as ever. And perhaps what he truly needed wasn't more hallucinogenic visions, but rather serious, professional addiction treatment. The post absolutely exploded, accumulating over 11 million views and becoming one of the most engaged pieces of content in the entire history of their long-running and bitter feud. Fans across social media responded with a mixture of sheer awe at Khabib's composure and a kind of dark amusement at the surgical precision with which he had just targeted McGregor's biggest vulnerability. The absolute genius of Khabib's response lay in its powerful subtext. While McGregor was busy accusing Khabib of exploiting his own father's legacy for profit, Khabib was quietly and effectively demonstrating what he had actually done with his post-fighting career. He was building rehabilitation centers to help recovering addicts and coaching the next generation of fighters through his Eagles MMA gym. In fact, he was scheduled to corner Islam Makhachev at UFC 311 in January 2026 against Arman Tsarukyan. He had even recently gone viral for a gym clash with the popular streamer Adine Ross in early November. His life, in other words, had moved forward in real, tangible, productive directions. McGregor, by stark contrast, was still fighting battles from 2018, as if the intervening 7 years had never even. McGregor's accusations about NFT scamming, particularly hypocritical, was his own well-documented history with cryptocurrency promotions. Back in 2024, McGregor launched his very own meme coin called Real, which successfully raised approximately $32,000 from investors before essentially collapsing in value. This, of course, left those who had trusted his celebrity endorsement holding completely worthless digital tokens. The crypto investigator Zach XBT had even pointed out this exact irony, noting that McGregor had conveniently deleted posts related to his own failed cryptocurrency venture right after its implosion. The distinction between what Khabib had done and what McGregor was accusing him of doing was absolutely fundamental. Khabib had advertised a very specific product, a digital collectible in the form of a traditional Dagestani hat, and he had delivered exactly that product to every single person who purchased it. No one was deceived about what they were buying. It was a straightforward transaction. A rug pull scam, by contrast, involves deliberately creating a worthless asset, artificially inflating its value through celebrity endorsement, and then selling off one's own holdings at the peak of the hype, while leaving everyday retail investors to absorb catastrophic financial losses. And let's be clear, this was precisely what McGregor had done with his real coin, and it was precisely what he was now attempting to accuse Khabib of doing with a product that operated on entirely different principles. The hypocrisy of it all was simply staggering to anyone who understood the basic distinction. Khabib had created something with genuine cultural value, a digital representation of a symbol that meant something deeply personal to him and his community, and he had sold it to willing buyers who knew exactly what they were purchasing. McGregor, on the other hand, had hyped a worthless cryptocurrency to his millions of followers and then simply watched as they lost their money when the inevitable collapse occurred. Yet here he was, somehow positioning himself as the noble defender of scammed fans. Islam Makhachev, Khabib's protege and the current UFC lightweight champion, offered what was perhaps the most succinct analysis of the entire situation. He simply stated, "Khabib broke his mind. He's not going to fight anymore." And when you look at it, the contrast between the two men's trajectories since their 2018 collision could not have been more stark. Khabib had gone on to defend his title twice more against elite competition, defeating both Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, before retiring undefeated following his father's tragic death, fulfilling a sacred promise he had made to his mother. He had then seamlessly transitioned into coaching and philanthropy, building an empire that extended far beyond the confines of the octagon. McGregor, meanwhile, had lost 3 of his last 4 fights. He had broken his leg in a truly grotesque fashion during the Dustin Poirier trilogy fight, a gruesome moment that seemed to perfectly symbolize everything that had gone so wrong with his career since that fateful October night. He had accumulated a mountain of legal troubles that would have ended lesser careers a dozen times over, controversies that followed him around like a persistent dark shadow. His attempt to transition into acting with the Roadhouse remake had generated mixed reviews at best. And while his business interests certainly produced income, they did absolutely nothing to rehabilitate his shattered competitive reputation. The contrast with Khabib's post-fight trajectory was painfully obvious to everyone. While McGregor descended further into controversy and decline, Khabib had ascended into a state of respected retirement, building institutions that will outlast his fighting career by decades. Think about it this way. The rehabilitation centers in Dagestan represent real, tangible good in the world. They represent people whose lives have been saved from the grips of addiction, families that have been reunited, and communities that have been strengthened. The Eagles MMA gym consistently produces world-class fighters who carry forward the Nurmagomedov family tradition of excellence. And now, here was McGregor, attacking Khabib Nurmagomedov over the sale of digital hats. He was accusing him of scamming fans with a product that had delivered exactly what it promised to people who had willingly and eagerly purchased it. The whole situation was just absurd. This brings us to the rematch that will never be and why it still matters so much. The one question that hung over this entire November 2025 conflagration was the same one that had been asked countless times since October 6, 2018. Will Khabib Nurmagomedov ever fight Conor McGregor again inside the octagon? The answer, according to every single available piece of evidence, remains a resounding and definitive no. Khabib has made it crystal clear that the sheer amount of preparation time alone makes a comeback incredibly unlikely. The months and months of grueling training required to return to elite-level competition, after years away, regaining the cardio, the timing, the ability to absorb punishment that competitive MMA demands, would be a monumental undertaking. His commitment to his mother not to fight again is sacred and, by all accounts, inviolable. It was a solemn promise made to a grieving woman in her moment of greatest loss. And beyond that, his current work as a coach and a businessman fulfills him in ways that competition never could, allowing him to shape the careers of others while building something lasting and meaningful. He simply has nothing left to prove, least of all to a man he has already defeated as comprehensively as any fighter has ever been defeated in a championship bout. But the discourse persisted, because the raw, unfiltered hatred persisted, and the hatred persisted because neither man seemed capable of releasing the other from the powerful grip of his contempt. The deep psychological wounds that were inflicted before, during, and after UFC 299 had proven absolutely impossible to heal for either party involved. To truly understand why this rivalry remains so incredibly combustible, even 7 years after its apparent conclusion, one must grasp the sheer depth of the wounds inflicted in the lead-up to UFC. At the UFC 23 Media Day in April 2018, McGregor and his crew infamously ambushed a bus with Khabib inside, smashing windows and injuring other fighters in the process. McGregor even faced felony charges that were eventually pleaded down. The promotional campaign that followed featured McGregor attacking literally everything Khabib held dear. He attacked his religion, calling him a backward Soviet, making crude implications about his gymnasium activities, and even targeting his wife and his father, Abdulmanap. Khabib's response at the time, "I'll kill you," was not some kind of promotional hyperbole. It was a statement of genuine hostility from a man who had been pushed far beyond his considerable capacity for patience. The fight itself provided Khabib with everything he wanted. Round by round, he systematically dismantled McGregor's mystique with relentless takedowns and brutal ground and pound. McGregor did have his moments. It's true. He rocked Khabib early in the first round with a punch that might have finished a lesser man. He even landed significant strikes in the second round when he managed to keep the fight standing. But the overall trajectory of the fight was never genuinely in doubt to anyone watching with educated eyes. The Dagestani's wrestling superiority was just too complete, his conditioning was too superior, and his will was simply too indomitable for McGregor to overcome, no matter what adjustments he desperately attempted to make. What made that defeat so psychologically devastating for McGregor was not just the physical domination. It was the complete and utter failure of his psychological warfare tactics, the very same tactics that had worked so effectively against every single one of his previous opponents. Jose Aldo had been rattled into abandoning his game plan, leading to him getting knocked out in a shocking 13 seconds. Eddie Alvarez had looked completely lost from the opening bell, but Khabib had shown absolutely nothing. He absorbed every single insult with a stoic, unnerving calm, and then methodically destroyed McGregor inside the cage. Khabib later called the experience "my vacation," describing the pure joy of legally smashing a hated rival. McGregor said, "Humble me, I'm not humbled," but his career trajectory since that night has suggested otherwise. The post-fight years have been incredibly kind to Khabib and exceptionally cruel to McGregor. Khabib went on to defeat Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje in dominant fashion before retiring at a perfect 29 after his father's death. A promise he kept to his grieving mother, who had already lost her husband and simply could not bear to watch her son risk his life in combat any longer. He then built Eagles MMA into a veritable factory of Dagestani talent, with his protege, Islam Makhachev, now holding the lightweight title that Khabib had once possessed, and Umar Nurmagomedov, emerging as a serious bantamweight contender who carries forward the family legacy. It's a dynasty in the making. The suggestion that UFC 289 had inflicted permanent psychological damage on McGregor was not new. It had circulated in various forms for years, but Makhachev's blunt assessment articulated it more directly than anyone within Khabib's inner circle ever had before. If anyone truly understood what that night had done to Conor McGregor, it was the man who had watched Khabib prepare for it with such meticulous attention to detail, and then watched him celebrate afterward with such profound and deep satisfaction. As November 27, 2025, drew to a close, the scorecard for this latest round of the eternal McGregor-Khabib conflict seemed crystal clear to most observers. Khabib had emerged from the exchange with his reputation enhanced, his composure masterfully demonstrated, and his important philanthropic work highlighted for the world to see. McGregor, on the other hand, had once again revealed himself as a man utterly consumed by a bitter resentment over a defeat he can neither accept nor transcend. A man willing to attack a grieving son over his father's legacy, willing to make zealous accusations without a shred of factual evidence, and willing to invoke religious provocation when all other ammunition had been completely exhausted. Dana White and the entire UFC apparatus had been curiously quiet throughout this entire exchange, perhaps recognizing that this particular fire needed no additional fuel from them. The promotional value of a Khabib-McGregor rematch remained, in theory, absolutely astronomical. It would undoubtedly shatter pay-per-view records and generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. But the practical obstacles were, and remain, completely insurmountable. White had previously called their rivalry the ugliest feud ever, recognizing both its immense promotional value and its genuine, undeniable toxicity. McGregor continued posting prayers and faith-based emojis in the days following the exchange, perhaps seeking a kind of spiritual equilibrium that has eluded him ever since that fateful night on October 6, 2018. Khabib, characteristically, just moved on. He started posting clips of the submission from UFC 229 on his Instagram stories with the implicit message that McGregor remained living rent-free in his head, all while he was preparing to corner Makhachev at UFC. The rematch, in any official capacity, will never happen. Khabib has been perfectly clear about this on numerous occasions. His mother's wishes are paramount and completely non-negotiable. His competitive legacy is already perfect, unblemished by the kinds of defeats and controversies that continue to plague his most famous opponent. But the war of words? That endless, vicious cycle of accusation and response, of deletion and resurrection, of old wounds being picked open and salt being rubbed right back in, that, it seems, will continue for as long as both men draw breath and have access to social media platforms. It is in its own strange way, the only rematch either of them will ever get. An endless verbal sparring match that neither man can truly win, because the decisive result was already rendered 7 long years ago inside the T-Mobile Arena. For the millions of fans who have watched this incredible rivalry unfold across nearly a decade, the NFT controversy of November 2025 was simply the latest chapter in a dramatic story that seems destined to never, ever end. The hatred between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor has transcended sport, transcended business, and has even transcended the personal grievances that have accumulated over years of bitter conflict. It has become something almost mythological. It's a clash of civilizations, of philosophies, of fundamentally incompatible worldviews, embodied in two men who could not and would not ever find peace with each other. Khabib represented tradition, family, faith, and the slow, steady construction of a legacy through sheer hard work and humility. McGregor, on the other hand, represented flash, bravado, individualism, and the seductive but ultimately destructive belief that charisma and talent alone could overcome any obstacle, including one's own worst impulses. Their fight had not merely determined who was the better mixed martial artist on one particular night. It had, in the minds of many observers, rendered a final verdict on which approach to life produces better results in the long run. And perhaps that is the cruelest irony of all in this entire saga. Conor McGregor had built his legendary career on getting inside his opponents' heads, on defeating them psychologically long before the first punch was ever thrown. But Khabib Nurmagomedov had proven to be utterly immune to these tactics. He had absorbed every insult and every provocation without ever losing his composure. He had delivered his response not through words, but through 4 brutal rounds of utter dominance, followed by a submission that clearly still haunts McGregor to this very day. 7 years later, McGregor is still desperately trying to win a war that he has already definitively lost, and Khabib is still refusing to ever let him forget it. The fans, of course, would continue to debate who was right and who was wrong in the NFT controversy. The analysts would continue to dissect exactly what happened at UFC 229 and what it all meant for both men's legacies. And the memes, the memes would continue proliferating across social media. Khabib versus Conor 2, NFT edition. Khabib snatched Conor's soul, now his wallet too. The discourse would remain chaotic, inflammatory, and utterly irresistible to anyone with even a passing interest in combat sports drama. But through all the noise, the fundamental truth remained completely unchanged. Khabib Nurmagomedov had defeated Conor McGregor in the most complete and humiliating fashion imaginable, and absolutely nothing that happened on social media, not NFT controversies, not rehabilitation invitations, not accusations of scamming or counter-accusations of substance abuse, would ever change that fundamental reality. The eagle had flown, the notorious had fallen, and 7 years later, neither man can truly escape the immense gravity of what happened between them. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out the other cards on the screen for more deep dives.